Hi everyone, and happy Advent. So, our reading today is from Luke, chapter 8, verses 1 to 3. And we're going to be thinking about Mary Magdalene. So, before I read this, I just want you to have a little think about what do you think of when you think of Mary Magdalene? What idea do you have of her in your head? Okay, so Luke 8, verses 1 to 3. After this, Jesus travelled about from one town and village to another, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were women, the 12 were with him, and also some women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had come out, Joanna, the wife of Huzzah, the manager of Herod's household, Susanna, and many others. These women were helping to support them out of their own means. So we've got quite a few women in this passage, most notable of who is Mary Magdalene. She's actually one of the women in the Bible who is named the most times, so she's a really important figure. But what do we think of when we think of Mary Magdalene? Well, if you're a little bit like me and you maybe grew up in the church or hearing things kind of from church teachings, a lot of the ideas that we have of Mary Magdalene are that she was sexually promiscuous, sinful, kind of just not somebody to follow. And this is an idea I think that's carried through into society today. We often talk about these ideas of 2 stereotypes of women in films and books and TV shows, right? There's the idea that you are a Madonna, a Virgin Mary, pious, mother of God, pure, and so on. Or you're a Mary Magdalene. You are promiscuous, you are sinful, you are doing all the things that society says are wrong, and you should be shunned, and so on. And you're very, very lucky that you get the grace of God. That's kind of a bit of a stereotype, right? Well, actually, I was quite interested when I had a look at this verse and I started looking a little bit more into Mary Magdalene to find out that that's not really a true picture of her at all. Wherever we see her in the Bible, she's actually presented as incredibly pious, incredibly faithful, and we know nothing of her kind of relationships hugely with men. But we know that she was really faithful, and that's actually what's emphasized in the Bible, and particularly in this passage. What we also know is that she was really wealthy. And we know that because if she was one of the women that was supporting Jesus on his journey, that meant she would have been giving money. And it was not uncommon for wealthy Jewish women to give money to synagogues. And in the similar vein or tradition, she would have been doing that with Jesus. What does that mean? And why is that important to think about? Well, what it means is that actually she wasn't a woman with no options. She wasn't somebody who was socially outcast and had nowhere else to turn but to Jesus in terms of her social status. And not to say that those aren't important stories, they really are, and they show us so much. But I think it's important to bear that in mind, because what it shows us is that following Jesus would have been a really big choice for her, I think, in terms of society. And that she would have really kind of brought all of this with her in serving Jesus. If she was a wealthy woman, she probably would have had quite a lovely home to begin with, unlike Ruth, who we thought about a few days ago, who didn't have that. But she gave it up to follow Jesus. She gave all her wealth with her, brought it with her to follow him, to serve him, to help spread the gospel. We see Mary Magdalene elsewhere in the Bible. We see her at the foot of the cross. And she was one of the women who was at the foot of the cross, at the crucifix, who would have heard Jesus say, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And so what we can see from her and her story in the Bible are two homes that she made. The first is that in her life on earth, she made her home with Jesus. She made her home with God as a person, and she served him. And from that, her ultimate home then came to be, as she heard at the foot of the cross, that her home was with him in heaven. And I think those are two really beautiful pictures of home that we don't often think about, right? I don't know about you, but I often think about home in terms of bricks and mortar. We talk about churches often in terms of people, but also in terms of bricks and mortar, physical places. But here we see this idea of homes and churches being that view of people. And so I think something for us to think about as we take this away is, what people do we find home with, and how do we make Jesus our home, regardless of what people may think of us?